So we'll get the program started. Tonight's speaker is David Malloy. David has a very popular Facebook page, I believe over 4,000 members currently, where he discusses colonial gravestones and the more interesting part, well not that they aren't interesting, but the carvers who made them, because I guess there was a certain group of carvers back in the day, which I'm learning more about on the page here. He's visited quite a few of our cemeteries as well as other cemeteries in the state. He's got some great photos, some great information, so Mr. Malloy.
Thanks for coming out, everybody. It's great to see you all today. And my name is David Malloy. I live in Haddam Neck, Connecticut, which when you approach it from a rock and gravestone perspective, that's brownstone country over there. You follow me? You all are in schist country over here. So you got your schisters, I got my brownstoners, and the twain kind of meet in between, but the rock doesn't exist in both places. And growing up in Rhode Island is where I'm from. I'm a Rhode Island boy, Cumberland Hill, which is the northeast corner of the state. And Rhode Island has a lot of slate. And growing up as a boy, I saw a lot of the slate markers. What you see up here is a slate marker by the Stevens family out of Newport, Rhode Island. They were the premier early carvers in Newport. And it was all done on a blue or a black aquidneck slate that was absolutely gorgeous and weathered really well. So the reason why I'm saying all this is because why do I like gravestones, you know? It's a tough one to ever answer. But where I grew up, there was a little cemetery near my house, and it had all these cool Civil War white marble stones, and I would just spend time inside there just looking at everything and wondering what their lives were like. And my dad, being a funny guy he was, used to like to take us up there on Halloween and scare us and tell us stories about when they moved the graves, they broke open the coffin and the captain's arm came out with a saber and stuff like that. You know, so all these kind of great things got me just amped up as a kid. And when I went to school at Roger Williams in Bristol, Rhode Island, and in Rhode Island you have family plots, small family plots, sort of like you have in the southern part of the state here. And there's not a lot of fun in those plots at times because you got one or two interesting stones, but it's not a lot of interesting stones. So if you're gravestone hopping in Rhode Island, you can get disappointed as you kind of move along, unless you go down to the shore. So when I went to college in Roger Williams, Bristol had a wonderful old cemetery. But it was just, I was just kind of like all of you. I saw cool gravestones, I thought they were really nice, I enjoyed my time there. I was attracted to them, I don't know why, but I was. Then I moved to Newport for 4 years, and we lived about a block and a half away from the ancient cemetery in Newport, which is huge. It's like 10 football fields. And it's got all this fantastic slate from the Stevens family and other carvers. But again, it was just, I liked what I saw. It was all interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed going into cemeteries, but I still wasn't the weirdo I am now, what I would call a gravestone enthusiast. And what happened to me, really, was going from brownstones to schist. One day, while I was working as a pharmaceutical sales rep in Norwich, Connecticut, I had a lunchtime that was free, and I went into the Norwich Town Cemetery. And if you want to get excited about a cemetery, it's the Norwich Town Cemetery. And for me, just about every marker and every carver in the Norwich Town Cemetery, I'd never seen their work before, and I thought I'd seen a lot of it. And they had a wonderful, wonderful brochure there that told you about the carver. And it pulled me in like a moth to the flame. I was immediately gone from a pacifist kind of love going through the history of it all to someone that was totally just enamored by it. And one carver in particular by the name of Obadiah Wheeler just stuck out at me like, who is this guy? If you are like me, you view ancient cemeteries as open museums, open air museums. There wasn't a museum, there wasn't art back in the 1600s, so to speak. You didn't have Paul Revere making silver chalices. You didn't have any really art, but you had guys like Benjamin Collins making wonderful cabinetry. You had your blacksmiths, you had your joiners, but nobody could really afford gravestones. All of a sudden, we started to see some of it. So I'm going to start out now talking about the history of the carvers in the state of Connecticut, where they came from. And we're going to start, go to the next slide. That, if you can believe it, is the oldest grave marker in America. And it is in Windsor, Connecticut. It is the boxed gravestone, table stone for Ephraim Hewitt. The Reverend Ephraim Hewitt came in 1633. Next slide, Jim. 1633, he came from Warwickshire, England. Next. And his stone was carved in 1644 by a group that came with him. They left in 1633 from Warwickshire across the Atlantic. They didn't stop in Boston. They came right up the Connecticut River, right to Windsor. And he became the pastor in Windsor in 1633 on his first sermon when he was there. And he came up with 9 families that came from Warwickshire with him. One of the families was the Griswolds. We're not sure what that meant by their family structure, but there was an uncle Matthew and a nephew George. George would have only been about 6 or 8 years old at that time. Well, this marker here was carved by Matthew Griswold, but the lettering on the side is clearly George's work. So it wasn't necessarily carved in 1644, but it is carved soon thereafter, and then the lettering was done soon after that. And this is the oldest, next year, the oldest grave marker in Connecticut. What you see then is the development of our first gravestone carver. We didn't have one. Nobody had one. There wasn't one in Massachusetts even at this period. The first gravestone carver in all of New England was a guy by the name of George Griswold, who lived right here in Windsor, Connecticut. This shows you George's style, which was this wonderful little simple arch, sometimes pushed back a little bit, sometimes not, carved on this gorgeous Windsor brownstone that was hard, hard, hard. This is a brownstone that in different quarries, from area to area, the stone could be soft or hard and so forth, texture-wise. But the Windsor stone was like none other brownstone around. It was soft enough to carve, and you could make decent lettering, and it withstood time. This one from 1648 is about as old a gravestone you will ever find in America. The 1644 Reverend Hewitt stone is the oldest monument, period. This is one of the oldest actual stones, and George made it. Next. Another stone by George, as you can see, his style created by him. He didn't really have any outside influences. He came from Warwickshire in 1638, excuse me, and he was born in 1633, so he was just 6, 7 years old. So by the time he got here, he just, as a child, came up the Connecticut River, never saw Boston, never saw anything, but he created this. It's not like he would have had the memory of it from being a child in England even. So when they talk about George Griswold, they talk about the purity of an American folk art, brand new stone with no outside influences. And you can see he weaves the letters together. He doesn't really have the lines all straightened out, but people didn't seem to care. Next. This here is the Leonard Chester stone, and it's in Wethersfield, Connecticut. This is also by George Griswold. It's a beautiful table stone. Next. And this is the actual table stone here. Here lies the body of Leonard Chester, the armature late of town of Blabby, and several other lordships in Leicestershire, deceased in Wethersfield, Anno Domini 1648, 39 years old. This is a pure George stone in Wethersfield, table stone. And this little grouping, as you can see, on that Windsor stone again, it's got that nice, beautiful smoothness to it, a simplicity to George's lettering. And John had asked me earlier about transition of imagery and heraldry from England and how it really worked its way through to America. And as I just said, you really didn't see that with the Griswolds. However, for him, they requested a family crest. Now, those are griffins and the star pattern. It's pretty folk arty as it gets next year. But that's what he created for them, and it still sits there today. And the Wethersfield Historical Society is extremely very proud of it because it's considered to be the first real mark of heraldry, of imagery on any tombstone in America as well. And we're not talking Boston, Massachusetts, we're talking Windsor, Connecticut. Next. That's the beautiful Windsor, Connecticut burial ground with their table stones. If you've never been there, it's a good one. Wethersfield, excuse me, Wethersfield, I said Windsor, Wethersfield. That's the Wethersfield burial ground. Next year. And in Wethersfield, we've got ourselves a few stones, but this also is back in Windsor. And here you can see George once again making a simple little heraldry sign on a little girl's stone. She was just a child. But we do see a little bit of that, but he never made a skull. He never made a cherub, never in his lifetime as a carver. He always kept to his simplicity and that little bit of heraldry. Next. That, again, is the Reverend Hewitt stone, so let's keep going here. This here, now we start to change. We've gone into our first we went from our first family of the Griswolds to our first dynasty. And what do I mean by that? Well, this stone was carved by James Stancliffe I. James Stancliffe, in the late 1600s, came across from England to the island of Nevis in the West Indies, where he worked as an indentured servant for 4 years to pay for his ability to come to Connecticut, where he landed in Lyme, and I believe it was 1688, if memory serves me well. And he started carving very soon thereafter. He moved from Lyme up to Portland, and he was the very first resident in what is considered Portland now. Back then it was still considered Middletown, but the quarries were on the east side of the river in Middletown. Middletown's on the west side of the river. And what you see here is the beginning of our first real gravestone dynasty. And what's really cool about his work, you can always tell it by what they call a tented A. His letter A, he put this little tent on it. He also carved in capital letters all the time. He didn't use what's called the thorn, the word yea, in anything for thee, because it's very difficult to tell some of these guys' work apart, especially in the family dynasties. Now, if we go to the next slide here, you'll see another beautiful stone by James Stancliffe I. You see the tented A's, his hand is spelt wrong, but it's just an absolutely gorgeous 1689 stone, probably carved 1695 to 1690, 1695, even possibly closer to the date, because he passed away in 1706, so it's toward the latter end of his style. Next. And again, I did this is a table stone in Glastonbury that's been recently cleaned, and it's just an absolutely beautiful shape, and this tented A sitting on the 1698. Next. That's the table stone on the far right in the Wethersfield Cemetery. Another wonderful, wonderful cemetery if you haven't been there. Glastonbury, the Glastonbury Green Cemetery. Dear, next. In Hartford, the Hartford ancient burial ground in Hartford is a sight to behold. The biggest challenge about this yard, if anybody's been there, is that 80% of the stones have been fixed in some way, shape, or form. And the restoration work goes from not that great to absolutely stunning. And what you can see here is that they put a layer over it somehow. They made a mold of the stone and then remade a stone out of the molding. And the other stone is actually underneath it. And it slowly starts to peel away. You would think that that's not what it is, but you can see the different colors of the stone behind it. 1697, very different for the Stancliffes to do this. They didn't make stones like this for anybody just in local town, but for Hartford, people paid money for it, and it was very prestigious for them. And when you're in the ancient burial ground in Hartford, you see a lot of different stone shapes by the carvers, just because they were paid quite a bit for it, and there was a lot of prestige to it. Next. A beautiful stone in Wethersfield. This is typical, Glastonbury, excuse me, typical of what you would expect from a Stancliffe simple stone. They didn't really go much for the heraldry or the imagery. They did a little bit of folk art to it, but these guys were masons. That was their main jobs. They were out there building foundations, underpinnings, stairs, hearths, stoves. And in the middle of all that, somehow they carved hundreds of gravestones. Next. And that's a stone right next to the one we just saw. And this is still James's work, and he tried to make this beautiful little folk art. And this is all just out of these guys' heads, you know? They had no magazines, they had no TV, they had no brochures. This is just their own little imagination late at night by candlelight on some winter night when just hammer and chisel, you know what I'm saying? Just as beautiful and pure as it gets. Next. Another beautiful stone by him. You can see he went a little bit more intense with it, but I gotta admit, I think this might be a complete restoration job, although it's a good one of his work in the Hartford burial ground. Next. And this one here is more back into Glastonbury, into a Weathersfield again. And you can see this is his son William's style. So we've moved now from James to William. William stays in capital letters, but he does little interesting things with his lettering and structures it, so forth in different ways. Next. And here we go with another stone by William, shaped just like his dad's. Sometimes some of the work's a little bit hard to tell, but here he's got the thorn. The yay, they call that the thorn. Don't ask me why, but that's what they call it. Next. And here we have another stone by him that shows his arched stone, breaking a little bit away from his father's style, that little bathtub style. And he made these beautiful little rosettes. And you can tell his rosettes because they had this wonderful rounded feel to them. Next here. And he also, in this stone in Glastonbury, did try and do some interesting things. This is for Marcy Halley, who, what had happened to her? Here lies one whose life's threads cut asunder. She was struck dead by a clap of thunder. And it shows like a pick and an axe up above, an hourglass, and two little lightning bolts in the top of the stone. So he had a sense of humor to him as well. And he's got the little spirals in here, which is more of something you have seen from the next family we'll see coming up, the Johnson family. Next. What I'm going to say about the Stancliffes, because I did mention they're a family dynasty. There's James Sr., then there's William. Next year. Then there's James Jr., James II. Then there's James III. Then there's James Jr. And then there is one more, Comfort. And there's 4 Jameses in there. It gets very confusing. This again is William. We'll go next. William now, this is in Kensington. And it's kind of got a nice little folky art to it with that crazy kind of scarecrow little face to it. Just there, kind of right out of his little head. But you can tell this is different. The shape of the stone is something the Stancliffes just didn't do. So someone paid a little extra for this. This is definitely, in its time, that would have been quite the piece. Next. Love the face on it, right? Little kind of scarecrow Halloween pumpkin. Next. And here's a stone in Glastonbury that's got the same shape, but a little bit more simple, without the scarecrow sort of head. Also by William. Next. Now we see James the Third's stones. James III sometimes carved in uppercase and lowercase, but he liked to do some little odd things. I don't know what it is, a globe or what that might be. Next. And here James II, I could write a sequence on him. James II, he carved in lowercase. So you could tell James and William were brothers, and about 4 years difference between them. But James doesn't show up in anyone's literature as far as studies go, from the scholars, to have been present until he was in his 40s. As if, for whatever reason, they can't really pinpoint an actual style to him. But I think we have, since Dr. Slater from UConn had come out with his studies. Next. This here is James III again, in his lowercase, with this sort of seaweedy kind of thing in the sides, the corners, not sure what they are, but he did this sort of like earthy things with this stuff, little crown in the top. All the little subtle ways to try to tell the Stancliffes apart. Next. That's the imagery of whatever that sort of is. Next. Here, we can see James going into a different shape. This is what we would call the Glastonbury Lady's stone shape. There's a carver called the Glastonbury Lady. Next. And this again is, still with James, with the flat rosettes compared to his brother William, who had rounded rosettes, and the sort of tree of life in Hartford. Beautiful stone. Next. Now we see the Glastonbury Lady. You can see the sort of shape coming through here of that Stancliffe design. The Glastonbury Lady, essentially nobody knows who this carver was. All the scholars have, over the years, have not really been able to pinpoint exactly who the Glastonbury lady is. Myself, Keegan Day, a few other people here in Connecticut, we've put our heads together, and we truly believe that this is James II's work. Next. And you can see this is James II's work on a different stone. You can sort of see the similarities between the two of them, with the little pumpkin head and the lettering being very similar. And that's a lot of the stuff we kind of have to tell it by the lettering, try and pick it through. The Stancliffes had a lot of very, very similar lettering, but once they started to get into the lower case, things start to be a little bit easier. But they also use the slanted one as opposed to the Roman numeral one. So sometimes the little numbers can help distinguish one Stancliffe from another. Next. Beautiful. Next. The classic Glastonbury lady. This to me looks like Ichabod Crane or the Headless Horseman or something right out of, Sleepy Hollow. It's just so cool. Just so cool. And yeah, next. These are all Glastonbury lady stones from Glastonbury, so that's why we call her the Glastonbury lady. But again, me and a couple of my friends believe it's James II. The thing under his neck, some think it's a butterfly. I think it's some glorious type of ascot, sort of just not done really well. Next. And again, you can see it's a little bit better of an ascot there, so to speak. And none of these stones have been repaired, which is the beautiful thing of it. I haven't paid a lot of attention talking about borders because, as you can see, I'm rapid firing because I got a lot of stones to show you. At any time, by the way, if you want to ask me a question, I know it's kind of hard to get in between me, stop me when I'm talking. Yes, dear.
So when did the angel of death appear on stones?
Well, the death head was, which I haven't gotten to yet, the first time we start to see it in Connecticut is around 1722 by Thomas Johnson. Now, they've been in Massachusetts from the get-go. I was talking with John with this earlier. Essentially, about 1700 in Massachusetts, you would say that the imagery peaks with all the crazy imps and arrows and the bodies on the sides of the stones and the borders, the glorious skulls from 1660 up to 1700. And a lot of this heavily influenced by European design. When you get into Connecticut, a lot of that is gone. And we don't see that in our stones. Our guys didn't have that same background. Because many of the early Boston carvers were directly off the boat here. And many of our guys are second descendants of being here. They don't have that attachment. And even the Stancliffes, who didn't really bring that with them. If that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next. And I'm going to fly through some of these Glastonbury lady stones. These are in Hartford. They're beautiful, but they've been restored. You can see the restorations in there. And one of the challenges, the biggest challenge with these guys doing the restoration is trying to match the colors. And sometimes it's hideous. That's actually not that bad. In the grand scheme of things, I'd be really happy for that. Next. Yes. So now we have James Stancliffe Jr. Well, James Stancliffe Jr. was the last of the three Stancliffe kids. There was no place for him to work. And he was one of the classic example of the third son had to find something else to do. And we know of him on the eastern side of the Connecticut because he carved a stone for one of his aunts in Portland. But it's the only stone by his hand in all of eastern Connecticut. Him and his brother Comfort quickly moved into the western part of the state, where they got involved and were very, very successful businessmen as masons, but they also were stone carvers. And James could make beautiful work, but he chose not to. He made this design, this weird dented head, square jaw, with this sort of thistle pattern, and he repeated it over and over again. People loved it. Next. But that is what he could really do if he wanted to. If you had the money and he had the time, he could do that. But he didn't. He didn't choose to do that. That's a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous stone in the town, which was called Wintonbury, which was Windsor, Farmington, and Simsbury. That whole section before it became Bloomfield was called Wintonbury, and that's in the Wintonbury Cemetery. I just love it. I love the little hands on the side. I love the thistle coming up along it. But you can see he's much more talented. Next, the eyes of the deceased. But look at what we got here, right? Looks like the Glastonbury lady, doesn't it? A little kind of ascot thing there. Next. Then we're back to seeing his typical stone with the weird little head that looks like a pair of lungs coming off, you know, like a pair of lungs sticking out of his head. Next. And this is what he could do on a simple, traditional Stancliffe type stone. Absolutely gorgeous. You can see his rosettes are a little bit more pointed. Next. Ah, the death's head. As to answer your question. Now we've just moved into the Johnson family. My favorite family of carvers of the Johnsons. And they're brownstone people, tried and true. He was born in the New Haven area, and because of that, he did see a lot of the Boston slates because they're all along the New Haven, Milford burial grounds. All along the shoreline, you do see Boston slates here. So he is one of these people that actually had experience with that and took some of it through. And you can see he took the pinwheels, he took a little bit of a death's head, he put a crown of glory on it. This is a little bit later. It says 1724, but I'd say this was carved in the 1730s because we're in lowercase letters. His early stones were all in uppercase. Next year. This is a beautiful double stone form. It's the only double stone I've ever seen that he made up in Hartford. You can see at least three different patch jobs on that one. Next. Here again is another, you can see how the skulls sort of change subtly. Just he couldn't seem to replicate it time and time again. And these little forks that kind of, pitchforks that stick into the ground coming off the border panels of these, look like spinning dolphins. That's like a second phase for him. Next there. This is more of an early, this is like a 1725. His earliest stones are, actually one of them's in our cemetery, 1725 in Haddam. So they don't get much older than 1725. And this is from Durham. He hasn't quite started border panels yet. He's in his capital letters. Next. And he experimented. A very odd light bulb weirdness to it. But at times I wonder, is it really him? Was there somebody else in the shop that might have done this? The owner of the shop would always carve the outside, the lunettes and the borders. He might have somebody do lettering if they're overworked, but not the lunettes. So you gotta wonder if that might have been one of his sons, but with that 1727 date and the capital letters, I gotta say that that's just him experimenting. Next. Now we're seeing time moving on. And in 1732, a guy by the name of Philip Stevens, who used to do business with the Stevens shop in Newport with the Johnsons in Middletown, spent time in Middletown. And the time he spent there had a huge impact on the carving style of the Johnsons. They changed themselves overnight. They went from having that death's head and started to go and follow what the Newport carvers were doing with a cherub. And here, you're starting to see, this is dated 1735, he's caught between the two styles. But his border panels are much different now. They've started to follow the Stevens shop of Newport. It's got these seaweeds spinning through it. And the skull still has his two noses, but now it's got a different crown of glory. The wings are different. They've got these coin marks to them. He's gotten rid of the chain across the front. And the face has two mouths to it, a jaw, or a mouth for like, I call it a dual stone. You have a skull with one mouth and one nose, and then you have a cherub with one mouth and one nose, like a dual image. Next. This is an earlier stone, but what I like about this is you're seeing him in uppercase still. This is Thomas. Look at how similar that is to the Stancliffe scarecrow. What happened was Thomas Johnson, when he came up to Middletown, he bought part of into the Stancliffe quarries, and he did a lot of work with them. They obviously spent a lot of time together. And the sentiment is that they rubbed off on each other. And that's clearly a Stancliffe influence. But you see at this time he's got those coils, which is a very spinning coil, which is a very, very ancient sort of design. Next here. This is a true transition. You've got the seaweed, sort of the patterns on the side. The wings have gotten glorious. The nose has become singular. You still have the dual mouths and the crown of glory, but you can see the Johnson stones, they're starting to form. They're starting to get better layout. There's more design to them. They've gone from a mason to an actual sculptor, you might say. Next. And now you can see this is what the Mary Meeks stone, which is considered the ultimate transition stone. He's got this brand new crown of glory. The wings are done nicely with these coined marks on it. You have the dual mouths. Next. And there is the Mary Meeks stone. That is considered the ultimate of the transition when Thomas Johnson, from the influence from the Stevens shop, went from Death's Head to Cherub. You got them both on here, and you get the best elements of both on there. Next.
Where is that located?
That is located in Weathersfield. Yeah, in Weathersfield. And it's right in between a bunch of table stones. Next. I don't know if I actually show it. Next. I hope I do, because it's keep going. I didn't. Okay, it's like it's in between two table stones, like down here. So you gotta get down on your knees to really kind of. The way I look at stones, I get down on the ground. I mean, you can tell. A lot of people, when they're taking pictures of gravestones, you just don't think about it. You're standing there, you shoot down on it. To me, I get right down on the ground. I get eyesight level with it. I come down below and shoot from different angles, and I think that's what makes a lot of my photographs sort of pop. It's not your typical just stand there and take a shot. This stone here again, Johnson's love it. Next. Transition. Now we're into Thomas II. Now Thomas Johnson's son, Thomas, has risen up into the ranks. In 1736, I believe it was, the Johnsons got their first order for brownstone in Mass to build, what's the name of the building in Boston? The Hancock building in Boston. And it took him years to build it. It took 6 years of him getting the stone out of the Portland quarry. And for 6 years, Thomas I stopped carving gravestones. And his son Thomas II took over the business. And this is what Thomas II made. So it's got the pure, he was always there with his father, always working with him. And the complications of working in the gravestone business actually killed all of the Johnson men at a very young age. Next. Here you can see a glorious Thomas II stone. Even though it's dated 1666, that's when he was born, 1742. Yeah, it's about that's into the mid-1740s. That's a Thomas II stone. It's got some of his dad's design, but the layout is really nice. The lettering's done beautifully. The border panels have a new foliate to them. Next. And now we can start to go into Thomas III. Thomas III was the best, had the most skill, the most skilled of the three Johnson men. They just got better and better and better from father to son to grandson. Next. And here you see a Thomas III stone. It's what they call the Baroque style. It starts to have these swags on the border panels. You've got this wings that are pointed up. You have a fully developed face with eyes and eyelashes and a little poke in the chin and this glorious structure that Zerubbabel columns followed later on next year. And this era brought a bunch of different designs because it was just Thomas II and Thomas III was starting to just do things together, and the shop was at its glory. And if you please keep passing through still here in the next one, you see the design just starts to get beautiful. You follow me? It's just all encompassing. They just get gorgeous more and more as we go. This stone here is bizarre. It's like the wings are tilted. It's like a bird in flight. And he stippled the back. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever taken a hammer to stone in your life. It's a beast to knock one chip in a rock. And these guys would just sit there and go bang, 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 bang. To put that stippling to give it this 3D effect. Gorgeous stuff. Time consuming to beat all bands. Look at those three-dimensional swags in there. I mean, how do you do that? And brownstone's not slate. You can't just cut this nice and clean. This is sugary. It's a rock that has been pressed from the glaciers, from sand just compressed. It's not volcanic. Next. Then we go to Thomas's brother Joseph. Joseph was the younger brother of the Johnson family, and the guy was bizarrely talented. I truly believe Thomas III got his skill set from hanging out with Joseph. But Joseph, being the younger Johnson, he couldn't make a living in Middletown because his brother in the Stancliffs dominated it. He moved up to South Windsor, and now he's working with the South Windsor brownstone, which is gorgeous. It's got this sort of orangey red hue to it, and it's withstood the stand of time. It hasn't weathered like the other stones, so they just look gorgeous. And not only is he stippling up in here, he's doing it in the sides, I don't know if these are pineapples or big berries or whatever, but he's bringing new design features in, and his cherubs are happy. They're happy with death. Next. They're happy. Look at him. It's like, I'm, St. Peter's hanging out there, he's waiting for me. It's a beautiful thing. A lot of these other guys, it's kind of a dour look on their faces, but not Joseph. Nope. He was like, yeah, here I come, God. Next. I mean, and this is for a child. Look at that, right? Isn't that just gorgeous? This little child's eyes are looking up at the sky. It doesn't look dead. But that does. You also had the jawless, scary, but you can tell it's his work. The beautiful features, the gorgeous lettering in that skull, just to die for. Next. We move now into the next realm. William Holland. William Holland was based out of Middletown, and he was just incredible as a sculptor. I mean, his work is just drop-dead gorgeous. The Michelangelo of Middletown. Unbelievable. He moved up into East Longmeadow in the 1750s and established what's considered the East Longmeadow School of Carvers, the Stebbinses and the Burts and all these wonderful Bliss. There was about 6 or 7 families of carvers that all worked with Holland up in East Longmeadow that all then went on to this right here. This is made by a guy named Stebbins. And Stebbins worked for him, learned his carving from him. I don't have any of Stebbins' work up here because it's a little bit more up from what I'm talking about, but I absolutely love Holland's work, and his influence was incredible, but he died, another one of these guys who died young. I mentioned that earlier, next year. Joseph Johnson. This has that sort of like cut through, so you get that different color coming out of it. Just absolutely gorgeous, beautiful. Next. This here is a guy by the name of Thomas Sweetman. Thomas Sweetman was another guy that he just had, Spellman. He just had a happy cherub. And he was out of Durham, and he just did these happy, like a happy little puppy, like just want to pet its head. And this was unique because he never really did this style anywhere else that I've seen. But it's just, you can tell his work a mile away just by that little silly grin. Next. Oh, yeah. William Crosby. The end of it all happened in about 1800. It was really starting in the 1790s where we were losing our death heads and our cherubs, and we were moving into the urns and the willows. The Revolutionary War was over. The children of that generation didn't want to be like their parents with these chattering skulls and all this stuff. It was a new era. The Europeanism of urns and willows was just calling to these people. They didn't want the starkness of death on their gravestones. William Holland bought the Johnson shop from Thomas III when Thomas was 38, 39 years old. Thomas died at age 39. From carving gravestones and being in the shop all his life, his lungs were full of stone dust, just like black lung from a coal mine or whatever. Many of our carvers died really, really young, and both the Johnsons did. The Mannings did. Didn't know it. Sitting there late at night sucking dust. Well, William Holland was just a genius. Next year. I mean that's William Holland. No, William Crosby. His lunettes, his cherub is just glorious. And these wonderful heartstones are just to die for. Next. He made 4 of them. They're all in the same cemetery in East Hampton. Why only the 4 that he did? Who knows? But because they're just gorgeous. Next. And that is like his, it's not one of his better ones, actually it's not. But you can see it's just that peaceful face. Next year. This is a stone by him as well, which shows that these guys could do interesting things. Now, what I'm interested in here is this scroll work right here, because I've got so much to show you, I probably can't show it all to you today. And one of the stones in the cemetery here that's in slate in town has that scroll work on it. Doesn't make any sense to me why slate stones are here. None of us can figure out who the carvers are. Slate is not indigenous to Connecticut. It had to have come from Massachusetts or Rhode Island, but you do have a few slate stones here. It was only brownstone in the Connecticut River Valley from the glacial sludge and the schist coming through, the Bolton Notch, and Ben Collins and Wheeler, they all used local schist right from their yards in Columbia. But when I see that, I say, gosh almighty, did William Crosby carved those slate stones you got out here, and he might have. And that's one of the indications. This is really cool. He's killed by a tree, by the fall of a tree, an 18-year-old kid. And he puts the coffin up there, the axe, the tree, just pretty damn cool, right?
Where's that stone?
What's that?
Where is that?
That is in East Hampton as well. It's called Bartlett's Cemetery in East Hampton. Yep, next year. And here, it's hard to see, but this is by William Holland. And it shows the hand of God coming out of a cloud with an axe chopping down a tree to indicate that he was cut down in life. Next. Then you can see the axe coming out in the hand of God. It's all stippled and beautiful. Unbelievable work. William Holland, like I said, was an amazing carver. Next. Another one by him in Middletown, in Durham. I only know of the two, slightly different design. The hand's coming out of the left side of the clouds, the other one's coming out of the right. Here there's a couple of trees, but you get the basic gist. Next, that's another beautiful William Holland stone. Next. That is John Johnson. John Johnson, no relation to the other Johnson, supposedly. His stones had this basset hound sort of face to them with these wonderful sort of ears, and he made hundreds of stones. Durham alone has over 100 of his stones. Amazing work. Just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work for what's a brownstone carver. Next. And you can see one of his basset hounds sort of with the uplifted, some of them have the downstroke. Next. You can see a couple of them side by side, just the beautiful borders to them, the glorious crowns of glory. And this brownstone is held up really well. There's some debate to where it came. He lived 3 blocks away from the cemetery in Durham on what is called now Maiden Lane, because he had 6 daughters and 5 of them never married, which is pretty weird for that time. And they said that on Sundays they would all be walking in a row to Sunday service, the 4 homely daughters and the one married one, and him and his wife. But there was a quarry on his property, supposedly. But after they all died, they're all buried next to each other in the cemetery. They renamed the road Maiden Lane in honor of the homely Johnson girls. Next. We move up into Windsor now, and this is the funny little Ebenezer Drake, who did all kinds of interesting stuff on Windsor stones, from these sort of funny little puppety things to really scary kind of faces. But this is one of his styles that's just, I just love it. There's a simplicity to it. I just love it. Next. This here is up in Windsor, and I just love that view. It's a late stone, 1799, double stone, carved by Luther Latrobe. His father, Thatcher Latrobe, was also a carver. Next. And that's another stone by Luther. This is in East Hartford. Next. That's a Thatcher stone. Thatcher's dad made a little bit more of a pouty mouth. What's interesting about this is Mr. Nicholas Foy, who was choked by a beam. Choked by a beam, the poor little guy. Age 19 months. They put that on his gravestone, poor kid. Peter Buckland was a real odd duck of a carver out of East Hartford. He kind of went along different forms. He had an old school to him. He started out really kind of weak and then got much better over time in what he did, but he dominates some of the yards. Buckland Mall, Buckland Quarry, the name lives on and on and on. Him and his brother were great carvers. And when you go into the Buckland Mall, or the Manchester Mall, and you know how you drive in, that brown stone, red stone, it's like going into the Grand Canyon of stone. That was the quarry. That's where the brownstone all came from. Right where the damn mall is where the quarry was. Go ahead, next one. Oh, the Holmes kids. This is in Eastbury, Glastonbury, and it's by a carver that we call the Eastbury Profile Carver. Nobody knows who it was. Did a bunch of really cool stones. For 4 young boys from the family that all died way too soon. You can see the tree has the 4 buds cut off of it. Yeah, that's when you kind of stand there in solemnness and just go, dang. Some of the parents, the grief that's on some of these stones is just unbelievable. So many young women that died early and in childbirth. Next. Yeah, I mean, this one just quiets the room. It really does. Now, on the other hand, Elijah Cowles was sort of kind of an odd duck, and his stones kind of looked a little ducky. This one's a little bit better. It's got the jacket with the buttons and the hairs flying, calling back like he's looking up to heaven like, I'm coming, Lord. Next. But this is more of his ducky look. I don't know what the hell he was thinking, because the guy could do great work, but he's got this weird duck nose. I don't get it. I don't, and it's for his father too. It's his dad's stone. You know, it's like, that's his idea of doing something for dad. Next. Another ducky stone. It's like, what, I don't know what he was thinking, because the guy could do good work. Next. That's a beautiful one. That's a beautiful one. You can't quite read it, but it's got the ducks, but with the heart between it. If that was cleaned, it would just be gorgeous. You know what I'm saying? Next. There it is. I mean, just look at that. If that was cleaned with the weird hair that he did, sort of like, almost like a Mohawk Native American with the weird nose, but something about that stone is just pure love. Next. But that's what he could do. You see what I'm saying? He didn't have to make that duck. If he wanted to make a profile, he could. It makes you wonder about these guys. Next. And that's my idea of a Halloween stone. John had asked me to do some Halloween stones. I'm like, I got no Halloween stones. But this here is by Ebony C. Drake in Middletown. We don't know what the hell they did. It's like Hannibal Lecter or something with these weird grabbing teeth into it. Yeah, that's what I want on my gravestone. I don't know what, you know, like some of them, when he carved that, I was like, that's perfect. That's exactly what I was trying to do. Makes you wonder. Next. Levis Kimball. Levius Kimball from up in the Pomfret area was just a guy that had a magical touch. His dad carved Richard. Richard's stones are in your yard. Levius's stones are here. His brother Chester carved. They were a great little dynasty into the late 1700s, before they all moved to New York State and started to work there. But he's what we call a Manning copier. And you can start to see some of that Manning style, which I haven't showed you yet. Next. I'm going to blast through these. That's his brother Chester's style in his urn style. Next. This is Chester's urn and willow on schist, which is a rare stone for him. Next. Ichabod Higgins. Ichabod Higgins was a copier of William Holland. And this is for the Reverend Knott in Essex. And what's cool is he put these wonderful pillars to show that he was a pillar of society. He's got the priest's sort of, collar there. And up above, that whole situation, it's just all meant to show that he was a man of power and interest. But it didn't quite come off that way, because he didn't quite have the skill set of Holland. But he tried. Next. Now, we have